The theme of this series is to disrupt the certainty that I observe people have around certain topics, but with the purpose of gaining clarity. So to gain clarity, one often has to disrupt our sense of certainty. I do feel confident of where these words exist in terms of centers of intelligence, but then how they work is very complicated.
I can remember one of the first conversations that we had about different centers of intelligence. My experience has been that bringing attention to which center I'm tapping into as I think through things and make decisions has been a starting place to not only nurture and hone, but also to bring awareness to these other sources of intelligence and to use different parts of my processing, my mind and my body, as well as my heart.
One thing to clarify is that in business and in the corporate world, they use the phrase centers of intelligence and not the same way at all. Those are not what we're talking about. We're talking about different places to gather intelligence that isn't related to orgs or organizations in the corporate world. This is something different. So when I speak of centers of intelligence, I mean in the human being, that there's the intelligence of the mind and the intelligence of the body and the intelligence of the heart. And these are ancient categories. I find them useful because they're different parts of our selves that have different access to different kinds of information. And so that's what we're speaking about when we talk about centers of intelligence, the mind, the heart, and the body. And then what kind of intelligence or what kind of access do we have in those centers? And that's what we would call intuition, instinct, and discernment. So discernment is in this intelligence of the mind, and intuition is intelligence of the heart, and instinct is intelligence of the body. Are not strict categories, obviously, and I'm not authoritatively here defining them and limiting them to these places. But I found that most people just throw around intuition. Well, where does intuition come from? Or at least originate from? What is the kind of primary source? Where's the primary origination point of instinct and discernment? And I think this is an interesting conversation to consider when we're looking at intelligence information, how we pick up things as human. And this space, by the way, is where we're picking up invisible information, intangible information, non-literal information. And that's why it's interesting in human decision intelligence that we're not just looking at tangible and literal data. We're also looking at and gathering information that is not visible and not tangible. And how do we gather that information and where does it come from? And I think these categories are useful in terms of a place to begin getting clarity.
Yeah, and it can even be a little bit confusing because when we trace back pieces of information, emotions don't necessarily come from the heart. And so we're going to get into a little bit of the complexity and how it's useful to trace the origin of intel as we're kind of evaluating what to do with that intel, how to prioritize it or navigate it. I'm not even going to say think through it. So much of what I have noticed since we started having this conversation is the way that people start their phrases with, I think we should do, I feel, or my gut says. And so these are ways that I'm noticing how our words speak us. When someone's feeling a certain way, it tells me kind of like how they're approaching the situation. When someone's, I think, or I know, that is gesturing towards coming from the mind. And then I remember back in the day, I used to teach like a management development course, and we would teach interviewing as part of the recruitment process. And we would show a video, like this wasn't my original curriculum, that was called More Than a Gut Instinct. And the intention was really good. The intention was that in an interview, to overcome your immediate bias based on all kinds of data that you're picking up that isn't necessarily representative of the human in front of you. And now that I think about the source of intelligence and the instinct and how we can learn to sharpen our instincts and check our instincts against other pieces of information, there is actually a ton of really valuable information that comes in a nonverbal way that's sourced from the way that information is hitting your physical body. And so I have new perspectives on how to incorporate instincts as one of the pieces of intelligence that you can use versus dismissing it to say, no, no, no. In our culture, we use our mind and we use rationale and we use reason and we use evidence and we use that alone. That's part of this conversation is how can we incorporate more centers of intelligence and how can they actually work together to create really solid, like you said, clarity versus overdependence or over-reliance on a single area.
Well, this topic of intuition, discernment, and instinct is tricky. And so I want to be careful to not at all be authoritative in this realm and in this topic. It's something that I am continuing to learn and to develop ideas around. But I think that what's important is to place to start is we don't really know what an instinct is and how it's different from an intuition, how that's different from discernment, and how discernment might be different from like moral or ethical thinking or orientation. So there's a lot of complexities in this topic. So I just want to at the top acknowledge that and then say this is just a place to think through in a very introductory way. To begin, we might just go through what each one is. Instinct comes from the intelligence of the body. And that means when one walks into a room, this is a metaphor, that there's things that are picked up that aren't coming from the mind. It's not something that is being observed with your eyes. It's something that isn't a calculation or picking up actual data. It's something that comes from, I don't know, maybe it's something like chemical or pheromone, we don't know, but it's very much like animalistic. It's very reflexive. It's immediate. It's not something that is necessarily goes through a process. It's raw and it just hits like a reflex.
Goosebumps or the hair on the back of your neck going up, that kind of thing?
Well, I don't know, because sometimes we're emotionally moved. That happens in our body. So I wouldn't say that's an instinct. I'd say
Okay.
that it depends. Like if we have a physical reaction, that could be a result of some emotional state. That's not an actual instinct. An instinct is something that doesn't go through an emotional processing and it doesn't go through a mental processing. It is immediate. It originates in the body and stays in the body. And then we move it to our minds to figure it out, right? So I'm gifted with instinct and then discernment and the least intuition. So in my instinctual experience, it's something that's just a hit. And then I have to process it and figure out, well, what the fuck is that? Like, I don't even know. So it's not, and maybe intuition and discernment is also needs to be processed in their own way. But the point of instinct is it's something that's very immediate and tends to be kind of experienced like a hit. Something's hitting you and it just kind of comes to you and it doesn't actually have any data, emotional or mental data attached to it. It's just a hit. And it's not actually something that can be processed much compared to discernment, which is the center of the mind. And this one is you walk into a room and you are actually picking up data and observations and making very interesting connections. Discernment is maybe similar to wisdom. You're putting together information that isn't obvious, that isn't necessarily concrete, or it's more than just structures and rules and more than just justice. But there's things that need to be discerned in a sense of reading between the lines, but with an actual observation and picking up of data, even if it's not tangible. I mean, all of these centers are picking up data. So to be clear, like all of it's data. It's just where is it coming from? And in the heart and in the body, it's not necessarily observable data. Whereas in the mind, it tends to be more observable or coming from a place that is a little bit more formed.
It's the outcome of your analysis.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, it definitely involves more kind of towards what we understand as a
Kind of a structured process of picking up, gathering, and then synthesizing and making connections and landing somewhere as a result of a mental process you've engaged.
yeah. I mean, again, these are not strictly boundaried. Humans have all three.
Of course.
Centers of intelligence, and it's what are we using in the moment, how are we combining them, that becomes something that is much more confusing. But just in the initial conversation to kind of make a delineation, but in real life and in real time, how much does this delineation exist? We don't know. The intelligence of the heart is intuition, and that is more emotional and relational. It is something that is more of a kind of, they're all senses, so it's difficult to talk about, right? But the heart center is one where you kind of walk into the room. It's more of an energetic experience where it's like, oh, this room feels like something, right? There's a picking up of colors. For example, colors can have a vibe, or the crowd has an energy or a vibe. We can have an intuition around that because there's a relationship there between other humans. There's a relationship between our emotions and the vibe and the energy. And it doesn't mean that we can't discern that as well, because there is something there that we can observe. And obviously, instinctually, there's something that we can pick up. Right. So all of these domains can intersect, but it's where it's originating and forming from. That's kind of what's interesting. Because then we can think, how can we develop our intuition? And I'm a perfect example. Like I have really good instincts. Intuition is different. And I'm experiencing that very differently. And it comes more from the heart, where there's an access point, where there is a tenderness, there is a receptivity, there is something different in terms of that quality of information, or
the kind of permeability and what kind of information is coming through, where it's landing. And then it's the origin of where the information becomes synthesized through. So if you're processing first and foremost through a heart center, it is going to feel more tied to emotions, feelings, tenderness, or it could be big and powerful as well. It doesn't have to be soft to be through the heart. And so that's the distinction here, is that this is just the starting place. Of course, we're incorporating discernment, intuition, instinct, or we hope to be, as we put awareness in these places, incorporating all three centers of intelligence. That's really the goal, to incorporate them, and especially in our biggest decisions.
100%. I mean, the idea is to figure out, I mean, for me, the goal is like, wow, I can notice I have access in this way, in this context. Here's how it seems to map. Here's how it comes to me. Here's how it forms. And then to notice where there's the gaps, and then how that exists in other people in really kind of fabulous, impressive ways that I don't have. And what I think is maybe most interesting about thinking about intuition, instinct, and discernment is these are exceptional places of information that aren't average, even though every human has to different degrees access to these. These places are places where we're picking up really vital information that is less tangible and that requires a sixth sense or additional senses, or for them, all of our senses to come together in a particular way so that we pick it up. And I think that that creates ultimately an advantage for people to tap into these places, because it's just not as simple as like looking at a spreadsheet, or doing a scientific test or whatever. These are things that are not as measurable, and we can test the information that we receive, but not in the same way. And so I think that, without going on too much, I think most people understand and have had some experience of this realm where they've picked up something that they can't prove, they can't even explain, and most likely can't even trace like where it came from. Although it's something persistent, and it's something that is bubbling up, that's surfacing. And what do we do with that information? And I think that most commonly humans dismiss it. They dismiss this, what we would call intelligence. There's certain intelligence that's coming through us, to us, and it's dismissed because it doesn't seem logical, or isn't verifiable, and can't be traced. And so the point of this topic is to put it out there as like, no, actually, this is really, really interesting places to gather intelligence and information, and to see what happens, and to use that inside our gathering of typical data.
Oftentimes we'll be talking, you'll be like, I have an instinct on this. Like, this is the direction. And where is that coming from?
Well, I think one thing that we can say that's across the board for all three of them, instinct, intuition, and discernment, is that it's a kind of intelligence that comes to you. And when I say intelligence, it's like, CIA or something. Like, you have been transmitted some piece of information that's really critical and is necessary. You're receiving that information in a way that you have very little data to pick that up with. So, for example, one of my friends who is gifted with discernment, I will have told her a couple sentences of something that happened, and she can immediately tell me exactly what she discerned is going on, like in that interaction or in that moment, what happened. Like, and I didn't give her hardly any information, but her presentation of what she's discerning lands and resonates with me really strongly, because I had the whole experience. I had this whole interaction with this person, and I'm relaying it to one of my friends who's one of my advisors. And she was able to give me this whole, like, discern what was actually going on and what was actually happening. And this is tricky, because how is this different than intuition? And also, how is it different from instinct? But what the throughput here is that one doesn't have a lot of data. How is this person picking that up when they don't even know the whole story, when they haven't even been given all of the information? They haven't even been given the context. So I think that there's something very emergent that is occurring. And this is why, sometimes I call it spidey senses. Sometimes it's kind of like this witchy place. Sometimes it's like just this metaphysical download, right? That's not coming necessarily from the physical world, even though, yes, it is, because we are physical creatures and we're listening and thinking through our life experiences. And who knows how that emerges. But I think all three of them, it's something that doesn't have a lot of information. It's just an instinct comes to you, or an intuition one has, or discernment is available with very little information. So that's something that I think is across all three. But I want to be careful to not overly delineate what it is, because we don't really know what it is. We know where to start. We know what it kind of is in terms of distinguishing one to the next, but it is blurry. I think oftentimes too, something that we think is discernment isn't. That's just logic and reasoning. Something that we think is intuition isn't, because it's something that is just some emotional reality that maybe is, you can read between the lines, or have the subtext, which is more of a skill, and then maybe a true intuition. And then also to say that skills combine with these areas. So if one is skillful and also has a good intuition or good instinct or discernment, right, you're going to compound both the skill and the discernment, right? Because they both exist at the same time and they help each other. So it is a tricky topic to discuss and remain credible, because we don't want to be overly authoritative. And it's something that I find interesting to present so that people can start asking the questions like, hey, what was that? I picked up something. Where am I picking it up from? Or how
Yeah.
did that occur to me? Where is it kind of originated from? And now how am I going to process it? What's more common for me to pick up versus less common? And then being able to notice that in other people, like what other people pick up that I don't normally pick up. That's how I came to this originally, was thinking like, wow, that intelligence was so impressive. How did this person come to that? And where did it come from? That's the question.
Yeah.
How does one come to a certain intelligence that is otherworldly and not super normal? And then how can we grow that intelligence or that ability?
I've had intuitions about like friends, relationships, or things that are going to happen. And part of this is like staying humble to say, like, huh, that's interesting. Where did that come from? Why do I have that knowledge or that knowing in my mind or in my heart? But then you're not going to go say, especially depending on what it is, you're not going to necessarily go tell these people unless it's something like watch out for. And so the process for me of checking my intuition and noticing what is and what's to be trusted, and really fine tuning or sharpening it, is practicing with it. So to watch things play out and see if those things come to be. That's where you can kind of learn to trust and to sharpen and to readjust, and also to have a little bit of discipline with it, right? Like if it's this otherworldly thing and you're getting these hits, not just like go and be destructive with those things. So just be like, nope, I just know this is the thing. I got a hit.
Yeah. And I think that this is probably the realm of the spiritual teachers, which I want to have reverence for, that this place isn't new. I'm framing it a little differently in a modern way, but it's an ancient understanding. And so one of the things that I think traditionally has been said around these places is that it doesn't come from fear or anxiety or desire. These kind of instincts, intuition, and discernment comes from a very regulated, peaceful place that's not where there isn't anxiety involved or desire. And
Where there's a
so
lot of neutrality,
a lot of
right?
neutrality.
Like you don't have any stake in the game. You don't have a desired outcome, any kind of agenda. The ego's not at play, right? It's just a clean slate.
Well, that's the question mark. That should be the question. Is that a lot of time, and I know I've done this. I felt like I've had instincts before that were really just matching my desire and my hope. And so, and how does one discern? And that is the place of discernment, because we are going to actually go into our mind and the wise part of us and put things together like, oh, okay, it matches here, doesn't quite match here. And I'm feeling this out, and to discern it. Is this a true instinct, or is it really more attached to my desire and my hope or my anxiety, that I'm trying to solve an anxiety? And by having an intuition or an instinct, kind of soothes that anxiety. One of the places that I want to invite people to is to not throw these words around so quickly. Have a kind of respect for intuition, instinct, and discernment as something that isn't, I don't know, it's not a flippant state of being. There's something that is substantive here, that is mysterious, and that if we can bring attention to that and some respect to that, we might be able to develop it. And I think we can develop these places of ability, and how that gives us a huge advantage. It also tied to these places, like to have respect and in how and when we use these words, is looking for a distinction between them. They're not the same thing. An instinct isn't the same thing as an intuition. Intuition isn't the same thing as discernment. Also, in the gift of the mind, discernment includes foresight and insight, but it doesn't mean that instincts can't be insightful or intuition can't be insightful, right? So we have this very, very interesting landscape of really mysterious places that is difficult to define, and not necessarily that we need to define, but maybe to, again, offer some clarity, some distinctions, a place to begin seeing it more clearly, not with an absolute clarity, but more clearly.
I have some words to check for a more terrestrial expression of these areas where maybe you have emotions and feelings. And that would be kind of the more surface or not really intuition, but we all have emotions and we have access to feelings, right? And then for the mind, like just being dedicated to a thought process or doing a little bit of like analytics doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a neutral state of discernment where you're not going away from something or towards something. You're just noticing what is and allowing the space out of a neutral place. And then for instinct, we also have a nervous system. Like when you said like goosebumps, so there's all kinds of ways that our physical bodies react to our circumstances and in our environments. And so that the body can be sourcing a lot of intelligence that doesn't necessarily make it instinctual. That's a different place. It's a more soulful place.
Yeah, exactly. And where this pops up more regularly is in our work with individuals one on one, because then we can actually map and partner in people dissecting and mapping some of these places of experience. And then together we can evaluate that, like, oh, where did this come from? What did it feel like? And then in retrospect, we can see how accurate it is. So then it's about looking at the past, right? To see how accurate some of these were. And in that way, we can also verify like what was what. So it takes a relationship with people to really help them work through this material. But I do think that it's a interesting and beneficial place to think about in terms of these areas, how we might be attributing them incorrectly, and also where we might see to invite them in that is beyond just a really good analytics. And it's not just in the physical, but in the more of the metaphysical realm. What kind of data and information can be picked up, and from where can it be picked up, and how do we evaluate that and assess? It's, to me, really fascinating, but it is absolutely a mystery and we do not know. But I do think that I haven't heard as much around people placing it is the actual intelligence that is sourced from the heart. I think at this point, it's intuition. What is the actual intelligence that comes from the body? I think this one is more understood and accepted as instinct. And then what is the intelligence of the mind and discernment, wisdom, insight, foresight that has been useful to how I have navigated and engaged these spaces. And then also ultimately integrating it into the more hard data and tangible data and the things that are more clearly observed in the physical world.
Yeah, I heard a neuroscientist talking about all kinds of information from the body, and they were talking about instinct and intuition interchangeably. And I kind of wanted to like jump up and down and yell and ask, like, exactly are we tracing this or defining it? Because even really intelligent people who can sense that there's more beneath what is purely known as facts and data, and they're trying to kind of gesture towards something mysterious and maybe don't have this precision to think about the source of the material.
Yeah, I think it's a good consideration, and thinking about how more contemplative states nurture these areas. The more that we sit and give some space and sit and give attention, that sometimes certain information can emerge. And then also that I think, at least in my own practice, that's how I've been able to grow and useful in human decision intelligence as we're making decisions in the physical world, to include senses that we have that pick up on this more metaphysical data, or at least less tangible data.
Yeah, it's like antenna or like sonar or something. Like, what is that pinging where you're getting information back, but it's invisible? Even emotional intelligence, like EQ. I mean, there's books on it. You can improve your skills. But having EQ and knowing how to read people and notice interactions and dynamics and process those in ways that lead to insights is not what we're talking about from an intuition. We're elevating the conversation to say intuition is something which that plus.
Yeah, exactly. It's that plus for all of these places where there is a normal ability to, notice, observe, collect data. And these places are more than that. So yeah, I think that's fair to say. It's like that's the question, is where are we having really good analysis and really good processing, even reasoning, evaluating, all these words that are more about skills. And not that, by the way, I think that developing intuition is a kind of capacity and skill. So I don't want to say that these places are not a skill, but I do think that it's maybe they're more of capacities that leverage skills. But I don't know. I mean, this is my exploration of asking these questions. And I think I am feeling it out, but feeling it out is not concrete. It's not a concrete process.
Yeah. Yeah. And then discernment, I also think about like, okay, you can weigh the pros and cons. And we do, even like you can apply skills of existential math to have even more sophisticated evaluation of priorities and timing and cathedral thinking, all these other topics we think about. Yet, discernment comes from taking all of that analysis, putting it on the table, stepping back, and remaining neutral. And that's where the kind of contemplative meditation of removing yourself from the decision making process can enter you into a state where you can access a different level of discernment. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think most people understand what discernment is. I think instinct intuition is a little bit more tricky. And so I think that's one of the invitations, is to not use the words interchangeably. Instinct and intuition, that's a concrete insight that I've come to. And then the second one is where they're located and grounded in, which is the intelligence of the mind, the intelligence of the heart, and the intelligence of the body. Those feel mostly clear to me. Everything else is, still an ongoing exploration of gaining more and more clarity as we practice and as we play.
Yeah. Also, I want to take a moment to highlight the power of the intelligence of the heart, because this is an area in our society that is downplayed.
That is a really important conversation that we cannot miss. Discernment is elevated, and instincts and intuition as words are elevated. But without the connection that intuition comes from the intelligence of the heart, I think this is a missing link. And people who have this gift, the intelligence of the heart, are more permeable. They're more sensitive. They actually are more affected in their bodies and in their emotional states. And that's something that is seen as weakness in our society. That if one is moved emotionally, and if they're moved easily, that is seen as weakness, when in fact it's actually super strong, and it is in the minority. Most humans don't have the strong intelligence of the heart. And the cost of that is sensitivity. It's difficult. It's a challenge to have a kind of sensitivity in the world, and to have that increased suffering, honestly. And yet it's these people that are able to take in and sense different information that others cannot, because of that sensitivity, because of that permeability, because of their receptivity. And that tenderness is the actual gift. And it's amazing and it's powerful. And it is not at all to be dismissed, or to, especially shouldn't be made to be seen as weak. It's incredibly strong. And so this is something that is maybe even the most important takeaway of the whole conversation, is that, in these places of intelligence, why is it that our society and culture tend to minimize and even degrade the intelligence of the heart, when that is, in my perspective, the most important one?
Yeah, just think of the word sensitive and the connotations we have around it. Most people can behave in overtly sensitive ways, and that's a reaction. The sensitivity isn't the problem, it's the reaction or the expression of the sensitivity that can become burdensome in moments. Where's the starting place for these three centers of intelligence?
The place to start considering and asking questions is, when do you have a sense? Because these three places are places of extra senses, where we're sensing something that isn't there. And so, where and when are you sensing something that isn't there? and how to actually give that some more weight in the sense of noticing that and giving it attention. Where is something emerging from you that feels like, ooh, there's something that could be true here, but there's no evidence? That's the place to give it some attention, and then to really sit with that, to examine that. What is that? And not dismiss it so quickly. The first step is to notice what you haven't been noticing. The second step is to whatever you notice, to give it more weight and attention, and to really consider it and look at it, examine it. And then the third place is inside that examination, notice, where is it coming from? Does it have anxiety attached to it? Does it have peace attached to it? Does it have curiosity attached to it? Do you even know what there is attached to it? And that is enough to start with. And then if you have any clarity around that practice over time, you'll gain some clarity, and then you can experiment with, do you act on these senses, and where can you experiment with these senses? But I think the first step is to really get familiar with the senses in general, like get familiar with how one is sensing something that isn't there. What is that? And how to bring attention to that and evaluate, is that something you're making up as a self-protection, as a way to clear anxiety, or as a way to fulfill a desire, and have magical thinking? Or is it actually a gift that your body is bringing to you, and that you need to listen to and consider? What I think is interesting, or maybe more interesting, in addition to just meditation and contemplation, is mapping where these senses come from. What kind of intelligence are they? And how can we foster and grow them, not just or only in our meditation practices?
Yeah, you had mentioned kind of having people around you that you can turn to, that you can, gain discernment, gain intuition, fill out the team, right? And I think it is in partnership with other people who have mastery, who have a lot of connection or experience or a sharpening of these areas, that you can start to kind of learn through their experience what it feels like, how it plays out in your quest to develop it within yourself.
Yeah, how I've come to these places is noticing where my particular senses are coming from, and noticing the absence when I don't have them. And when I notice them in others, to actually ask them, what does that feel like? How does it come to you? And really asking them questions. And then they often don't know. So then it's an opportunity to learn together, because it can be investigated. Like, we can consider it. And the longer I ask myself the questions, the more clear I am around what an instinct is and what it's not. Or moments where I'm like, oh, this kind of feels like I might be having an instinct and an intuition. And that's more new for me as I've been practicing. And then discernment is one that's a little easier to access comparatively. But either way, like, developing these landscapes, developing these capacities is really powerful advantage in decision making, and in just the way that we navigate our relationships, and how to trust oneself, or how to verify whatever information that we're processing. This becomes another way that we can verify and discern.
Yeah. So along the way, we can be building other skills that relate to these and help sharpen and evolve them. I really like how you went to self-trust, because at the end of the day, to be able to trust the thinking, the feeling, the body sensations, and how do we either develop or erode the trust within our own decision making? This is incredibly powerful to know when to take it a little bit slower, or when you can move more fast.
Great example for instincts is fighter pilots. That once there is a developed competency that gets in your body, that's when we have our bodily instincts that we can, in a split second, because it's not something that needs to get processed through our mind or through any relationship. It gets processed immediately through the body, and we can make decisions that way that are instinctual. So I do think, again, it's discernment and instinct are a little bit easier to figure out. Intuition is the place that is very complicated and effusive. But I do like the idea of being clear, at least on instincts and how in the body that they are, and that is an easier access point, because any kind of competency that is externalized, like in an actual action and performance, something that requires a body to perform it, there's going to be really a good place to notice and acknowledge instincts are at play. Absolutely.
I'm trying to think of places where the heart is at play. Those are going to be the most natural places for intuition to show up.
It's really, really tricky to locate and map intuition because it is coming from the heart, and that place of relationship. Everything is about what's in relationship to everything else. So it's about picking up emotional states and emotional truth. So it doesn't require an actual experience of an emotion, but what it does pick up is an emotional reality or a relational reality that isn't just a relationship between two people, but a relationship between ideas or concepts in a way that's also discerning. Intuition and discernment are both about putting things together that isn't obvious that go together.